Everyone, I, Sunita Raste, on behalf of the Interdisciplinary Program in Educational Technology, extend a warm welcome to all the participants. We are elated to have you all for the International Conference for Technology for Education, T4E 2023, organized by the EdTech Society India and hosted by the Institute of Eminence, IIT Bombay. T4E 2023 aims at providing a forum to bring together researchers, teachers, students, developers, and practitioners widely interested in understanding the ways in which teaching and learning can be enhanced with technology, as well as exploring new roles of technology in educational processes. With this, I request Professor Sahana Murthy, General Chair of T4E 2023, to address the audience. Good morning, welcome to all of you. It's really nice to see everyone here. I'm Sahana Murthy. I'm one of the general chairs. So, on behalf of the entire T4E organization, Professor Maiga Chang, the other general chair, and everybody else who you will get to know in the next few minutes, I extend a very formal and warm welcome to all of you. So, T4E has some new things. Firstly, it's new. We haven't had T4E since 4 years, 2019 in Goa. There was a lockdown, pandemic, and then other things. So that is one really good thing. And I think all of you are part of helping the renewal. So that's something we're very grateful for the fact that we were able to get it started again. T4E also has some new aspects. A lot of things are similar to what it's been if you've been regular attendees of T4E. But let me tell you two new things. One is that T4E is now being sponsored and organized by the EdTech Society. I'll just go to the previous slide. You'll see the logo on the top left. EdTech Society was established about 2 years ago. It's a forum again for practitioners, instructors, researchers, students, teachers, everybody to come together, work in the broad field of technology for education. And we have a session tomorrow where we have two sessions actually tomorrow where people from the EdTech Society will discuss more about this. So, T4 is now under the EdTech Society umbrella. Next slide. Yeah. The other, so much new thing, but a broadened vision for T4E is if you look at the title, it says T4E. 4 is not just for, the 4 represents 4 different perspectives of viewing the connections between technology and education. So it's technology for education, the tools, technology of education, like the science of using technology in education. It's like the learning sciences, technology in education. So whoever of us, especially instructors or people working on the field, use technology for learning and teaching and access, and technology across education, which is more the access parts and reaching out and so on. So we wanted to broaden the scope to include a lot more people into the field. No, stay there. So I also want to announce that with the renewal, T4E is extending several scholarships this year. We had about 85 applicants, including close to 70 students and other researchers, apply for scholarships. 80% of the registration fee will be reimbursed as the scholarship, and we will get in touch with you for the logistics and the procedures. If you were one of the people who had applied, you can just wait for an email from us or get in touch with one of us with red yellow badge. We'll more on that. T4A has also offered a few scholarships to found NGOs working on the field, okay, who are doing a lot of good work on the field. So we have that also going this way. Okay, what is in it for you for the next 2.5 days? There will be sessions, there'll be intellectual activities, all the paper sessions, the keynotes, the workshops, and all that's expected of any academic conference. There will be at least one physical session. So we have physical slash social session. So we have a hill climbing activity. IIT Bombay has lovely nature. You can go for walks in the evening. We can do something impromptu. We'll see about that one of the evenings. But on Sunday morning, we have a hill climbing activity, and we'll give you details tomorrow. We'll make sure you're back in time for the keynote, of course. So just have to get up a bit early. T4E also has digital and social activities, both physical and digital. So that is something which Sunita will be talking about later. Finally, and this is sort of the most important, and it's my privilege to say this, that T4E is happening thanks to many, many, many people. Let's start a little bit with the past. We have a guest of honor here, Professor Deepak Phatak, he likes to call himself a teacher in the but most of you, many of you may know him as one of the architects of distance education program in IIT Bombay. He's played hugely key roles in the national mission of education in ICT in India, teach 10,000 teachers and so on. So thank you very much, Professor Phatak, for being here today. It's a good motivation for us that you're here. Uh, Thanks for all the keynote speakers to have traveled across, I don't know how many thousand miles. We have two of them here today in person, Paulo, Blikstein and Enrichment, and we'll hear more from them. Thanks to all the workshop organizers. So this is a good time to talk about who you can ask anything, ask me anything. If you see anyone with a red badge, these are the chairs to the organizers. So can the red badges just stand up and wave? Okay, we have about 10 or 15 of them. And people with the yellow badges, who are the volunteers, they're mostly research scholars, PhD students, MTech students from the ED department. Just stand up. You can either see them with a yellow badge or those t-shirts which say ET or this scarf. Okay, so there's a lot of scarves, but the yellow badge I think is very identifiable. So they're the ones you can ask any question, where do I find something, anything. Okay, so they're here to help. So let me now thank and also hand it over to the program chairs. Next slide, please. So we have three program chairs, and Ram Kumar, on behalf of them, will talk about the action program. So thanks very much, and welcome to all.
So I'm going to talk about the stats of the papers received and reviewed. This is on behalf of all the program chair members, Sitanshu Mishra here, and yes. So yes. So we had 247 abstract submissions. This is threefold of what we usually get it in the T4E. When we revamped, rebooted, we didn't expect that this much support will be there. Thanks everyone, all the authors for submitting the papers. So out of that 204 full papers were received, then the submissions were from different countries, and we had reviewers, around 200 reviewers from 15 different countries. So each paper has been reviewed at least twice, at least by two reviewers in a blind process. We had around 2.38 average review of each paper. So from this, we selected 20 full papers and 63 short papers and 14 poster papers. So we'll be seeing all this in the next 2.5 days. So apart from the posters and papers, we have 3 keynote speeches and 7 workshop and best practices track, industry panel, etc. So to accommodate all the 80 papers, we made a parallel sessions of paper sessions. So you have seen the program book. So please attend all those. Try to maximize your attendance here and attend as much as possible. So we thank organization team and we thank the technical program committee members who reviewed all our papers and despite constant reminders and you helped us to review all the papers. And I thank the best practice chair and teaching demos chair and the workshop chair for selecting the papers. Um, and also I thank all the authors who are present here and thank you for being here and welcome again. So apart from this, we also had a new program called Academic Outreach Program. This we started when we sent the first call for paper in the May. We also started this program asking for the HC members, if you are interested to write a paper, if you need some support. We had this academic outreach program. The first workshop has been conducted by documenting education technology research from May 10th to July 21st, the T sessions in hybrid mode. Then that is done by academic outreach program chair and the manager. And we had 70 researchers applied, and 11 of them participated in all the three sessions. They all submitted a paper, like eight of them submitted a paper. 7 of them have been selected as a short and full papers. So thanks for the academic outreach chair. Thank you. Now I will ask Professor Shamantak Das to talk about the local chair and local.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to IIT Bombay. So this is perhaps the best time to visit IIT Bombay. We have great weather, perfect for taking a walk around the campus. We have a beautiful lake and a hill. So make sure that the extra time that you have, apart from the conference timings, you can ensure. There are a lot of cultural activities that are happening across the city. If you are staying here, if you're staying here a few days more after the conference, maybe you can look into that also. So I'll give you some tips to maximize your conference experience. So we have a dedicated Wi-Fi network called IITB Guest. Here's the user ID and the password. Maybe you can take a snap of it. That will help you. Also, the details are there in your program book. So by program book, I mean this. It's already there in your kit bag. If you want to have a digital copy of this, you can get it from this particular QR code. And as Professor Murthy has talked about, that we have 3 badges. Most of you will be, who are coming from outside, will be having the blue badge, which is the participant badge. So for any queries that you have, you can reach out to the persons having the yellow badges who are volunteers. There are current students, both MTech and PhD. And in case they are unable to find a solution, you may reach out to us. So just to give you an overview, for any help that you need, reach out to the volunteers. For registration and certificates, reach out to the registration desk that's in the ground floor. And anything else, reach out to the general chair, program chair, or me. So regarding the certificates, we are giving out 2 certificates depending upon the type of registration you have done. In case you have a paper which is a short or long or a poster or a demo, you will be given a certificate of presentation. And in case you are just attending this conference, you will be given a certificate of participation. And that's it. Eat, connect, network, and have fun. Now I'll be handing over to Sunita. Sunita is going to talk about the layout of this building. So just to inform you that we are having 2 other conferences which are happening in the same building. So just ensure you're in the right conference and right room. Although no one is going to stop you from entering into any other conferences, but I hope that makes sense. Back to you, Sunita.
Thank you, Professor Sham, for the details. So I'll just reiterate on the details once again. So for your information and ease of navigation, here's a layout of the ground floor. So as Professor Ram mentioned earlier, since we have multiple parallel sessions which will be ongoing, so we have the parallel sessions ongoing in the 4 seminar rooms that are available to us, and all these seminar rooms are present on the ground floor. You can see that there are seminar room 1, R1, R2, R3, and R4. So these are the rooms where the parallel session, including the paper presentations, the workshops, the demos, and everything will be happening in the parallel sessions. When we have tea break, coffee break, or the lunch break, the food will be served in the cafeteria, which is right across the entrance. So make sure you reach there on time. For the keynotes that are the plenary sessions that will be happening on each day, the keynotes will be happening in this lecture hall where we are seated right now. That is on the 2nd floor, lecture hall 21. And the Wi-Fi details, if you have not taken it earlier, you can take note of the Wi-Fi details. And here's the overall schedule. You can find this overall schedule in the program book that has been provided to you in the kit. It can also be found in the T4E website. So have a look at the program schedule and make sure to note down the points or note down the sessions that you want to attend. Just make note of the poster and demo sessions which are scheduled on the 2nd day. The poster and demo sessions will be happening on the ground floor foyer. Our volunteers will help you with putting up the posters. And here are some basic instructions for the presenters. So all of the presenters, I request you to kindly be present in your respective seminar halls at least 10 minutes before the start of the session. Please make sure to load your presentations on either Google Drive link or the pen drive, which will be provided to you by your session chair. So kindly contact your session chair for the same. It's a request for all the presenters to kindly follow the time limit that has been provided to you. If you're presenting a full paper, you'll get 15 minutes for presentation followed by a 5-minute discussion. If you're presenting a short paper, you will get 12 minutes for presentation followed by 3 minutes for discussion. And if you're presenting a best practices session, you will get 5 minutes for presentation. Kindly note that this session will be taking place in the form of a panel discussion. So we will have a Q&A at the end of this session. So for the interaction during the sessions, which will be happening, for example, the keynote or the workshop sessions, we will be using Padlet as a platform to post all your queries, your comments, or your questions. Our volunteers will help you out with this QR code, which will be provided to you in each session, or you can also note it down right now. So you can just scan the QR code and go to padlet.com where you can post your queries and questions. For the informal sessions or for the informal interactions, you can also follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, following the hashtag T4E 2023. And for other informal interactions, you can join the WhatsApp group by scanning this QR code. Please make note of all the QR codes, which will be helpful for you to join the informal and fun interactions also. Now, without the further ado, let us get started with the session that we all have been looking forward to, our first keynote session for the day by Professor Paulo. And I would request Professor Sahana Murthy to please introduce our keynote speaker for the day. Thank you. Use this for live stream. Okay. Okay. Yeah. But we have enough people. We have enough. Yeah, just get people here. Get people here. Yeah. So our first keynote speaker for T4E 2023 is Paulo Blikstein. He is an associate professor of education and an affiliate associate professor of computer science at Columbia University. His main research focuses on how technologies can transform learning, learning of science, engineering, and computation, how machine learning and AI can be applied in education research, and so on. In 2010, he started the Fab Learn program, a lot of work with making and maker spaces. It was one of the first academic initiatives to bring maker education to schools. He is the recipient of the US National Science Foundation's Early Career Award. And Paulo has also been a professor in Stanford University for 10 years before he joined Columbia. He holds patents for the development of Google Blocks, a tangible programming toolkit for children, and he's the co-inventor of GoGo Board. So he has actually brought a couple, I don't know if it's here, but if you're interested in that, you can just talk to him about it. So Paulo has earned his PhD from Northwestern University, before which he got an MSc from Media Lab at MIT. So today he'll be talking about his long-standing work in maker education, transforming maker education into a platform for cultural enrichment and social imagination. So as he gets set up, I'll also tell you something that's not in his formal bio, but an interesting tidbit that I learned. Paulo said that his father can actually read Devanagari and he's a professor of Sanskrit. So when I first met him about 6 months ago, he said, I have these India connections. So that's where our interaction started. So welcome, Paulo, and over to you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for this nice introduction. Okay, we'll just... Okay, well, thanks. Okay, now there is a microphone. Thanks again, Tahana. Thank you for being here. It's amazing to be in India for the first time. As Tahana said, my father was a linguist, is a linguist and a Sanskrit scholar, and I've heard about India for like my whole life, and so it's really nice to be here for the first time. So this is what I'm going to talk about today, and if you after the talk, if you need like the papers or the slides, whatever, just you can send me an email and I can send you a lot of the work cited here. So every time I give a talk about education technologies, and this is a conference on education technologies, I like to remember that there are two types of education technologies, roughly. So one is what I call, let's hope this, okay, it's okay. Okay, let's just, oh, okay. So one is what I call the universal model of education technology. And it goes a little bit like this. There is content that is predefined, and we need to kind of push that content in the heads of the kids. And we need to do that in the most efficient way we can at the lowest possible cost. And we, as technologists, we need to work to kind of engineer and optimize this process. So interestingly, there's a bunch of illustrations from a long time ago that try to kind of capture that. So this is an illustration you might have seen before. It's from a French illustrator from 1899, and he was imagining school in the year 2000. So you can see this kind of universal model, the content being ground in that machine, the books, and then it kind of magically goes to this kind of fancy headphones or brainwave devices or something, and then the kids are looking into the void, just kind of absorbing the content into their heads. And I mean, of course, this system doesn't exist, but I think it captures really well this kind of model, right? That there is content and the kids are passively receiving it, and our job as engineers is to kind of optimize it. There are some, many of such illustrations. One that I also like, but it's a little more violent in a way, is this from Japan from the 1950s and 60s. So this is sort of the same idea. There's like a kind of electronic teacher on the board. There's no human teacher, and the kids are all looking at these computers, and they have to get that math question right. But in this one, they are more explicit about how this whole thing works. So there are robots beating the kids that get the answer wrong. So it's a sort of a gamification on steroids, that you get actually beaten by the robot, and it's kind of tragically that the kids are like smiling at the ones that are being beaten. So it's quite violent in a way. But so this kinds of models is what I call this kind of universal model of EdTech, and they are about optimizing something that already exists, right? So a lot of those things that we're seeing there, like this kind of unidirectional content transmission, all this kind of punishment. I mean, not physical anymore, but punishment in other ways. I mean, tests and there is one right answer for that question. All of that already exists in our schools for the most part. And so this kind of technology is trying to digitize that. And I mean, it's not that this kind of digitalization of more traditional things is not needed. It's needed in many ways, and it has a place in education. But when we think about school in the 21st century, we don't want it to look like this all the time. and we know we cannot like radically change it overnight. So some things will still be like, you know, lectures and tests, and we have to kind of live with that. But as designers, we need to think about something different, right? Something that's not just that. Because a lot of this kind of model of EdTech that is like information transmission, it might be working for governments or for companies that make money out of this, etc., but it's not working for the most important stakeholder in education, which are the kids. Because in the pandemic, for example, we saw that when we sent the kids home with apps and videos and all kinds of technology and said, oh, go home and sit on the couch and learn by yourself with all this technology, it didn't work. So the idea that education without human mediation and human intervention and teachers and all of that, the idea that this could work for kids was not exactly a success, right, during the pandemic. Of course, it works for some kids, but not for most kids. And if you have kids at home, you might see how there's an enormous diversity in how well kids do when they are by themselves learning. Some can do great, but the majority really need humans helping them, understanding them, caring for them. So, you know, where does this leave us? So we have this model of education technology. It has its place, but it's not going to be a miracle. And it also is not the kind of ethos that we want for 21st century education. So we need to recognize that, you know, the changes that we want will not only come from this. So what is the kind of second model of education technologies? So this second model comes from the conclusion that there will be no kind of end game, like a positivistic, data-driven end game in education, that one day we'll just have all the data in the world, we'll collect data through all this kind of computational systems, and we'll finally figure out the final formula for our education, and we'll design the perfect curriculum that will be, you know, perfectly efficient. That just will never happen, because that's not the nature of the social environment of schools. It's not the nature of the human brain. And so education is less of a problem that needs to be solved by our kind of engineering talents, but it's more like a perennial, a forever battle of design and redesign and data collection and understanding the system. And so it's not the kind of engineering problem that we can just fix forever. And so in this battle, in this kind of continuous challenge, what can we do? So we understand that there, you know, this kind of model, this kind of more traditional things will be there, but we can design new things that will coexist with that. So, you know, when I was younger, I used to believe that there would be a day where education would radically change, and we'll wake up in a different day and everything would be different. Kids will be doing projects, will be doing all kinds of interesting things. But I realized that education is too big for that kind of change. So it will be more of an incremental change where we increasingly conquer time. So right now, 95% of schooling is about transmission, is about testing and all of that. What if in a few years we can have maybe 80% of the time being about that, or 70%, and more time being dedicated to other kinds of things? So for example, project-based learning, open-ended investigations, activities in labs, in maker spaces, and all kinds of things. So if we can convince schools and the public and parents and kids that this is a good thing, we can over year increase a little bit how much time kids spend doing those kinds of things. And I think that's a more kind of realistic way that those kinds of changes will happen. So to do that, to conquer time in school, so to make the time that kids spend in school be less about direct transmission, lecturing and testing and all of that, what do we need? To have more of project-based learning, to have more investigations that are interesting for the kids, etc. So we need a set of theories, we need a new kind of space where this can happen, and we need new kinds of school activities. So the theories we already have, so those are the theories of John Dewey, Piaget, Vygotsky, Seymour Papert, Edith Ackerman, and many others that talked about constructivism, constructionism, critical pedagogy, social cultural approaches to learning. And what are those theories about? And many of you might know what they are about, and probably I should have changed slides, but okay, it will come. Oh, my computer. Okay. Okay, so I'll leave you with that more fun picture. So, so what are those theories about? So they are about the fact that education should connect to the lives of kids. They are about that education should be more about kids' realities, about their culture, and that knowledge is rarely transmitted from one head to another, but it's always kind of reconstructed in the heads of the learners. So this idea that there is like, a kind of knowledge here in the head of the teacher, and the student gets a copy of it in their head. We know from cognitive science, from all kinds of research for the last 50 years, that never quite happens. That learning is always a reinterpretation of what's going on around you based on what you already know. And so this kind of puts us in a very different place, because instead of thinking of learning as optimizing transmission, we need to enrich reinterpretation. So we need to create environments where kids can have multiple experiences, they can learn socially from others, from teachers, from the materials, they can experiment, do all kinds of things, and so have rich experiences that help them build their own knowledge instead of just receiving what's already there. And so there have been many experiences in creating those kinds of environments where it's not about transmission, but it's about reconstruction. So I'll show you one of those experiences. And so this is from a Time magazine article, and they say in this article, picture two groups of students. One is sitting in rows, the second is in the roof of a tall building. They see industrial zones and residential districts. They go down the streets, they explore the city. Then they go back to their classrooms, compare notes, discuss what's right and wrong, etc. And the first group is still memorizing equations. So this was an article on Time magazine about a new type of school in the US where kids were doing these kinds of things. Like instead of sitting memorizing equations, they were going down to the city, looking for solutions for different kinds of urban problems, doing all this experiential stuff. And one interesting detail about this is that this is from 1939 on Time magazine. So it's almost 100 years old. For 100 years, we have been trying to do those kinds of things, and you can see, like, from the Time magazine what was actually doing. So the kids were, visiting the city. They were like investigating problems, and then they were doing this kind of primitive maker activities, building the train station, building all kinds of tracks and things in the classroom. So those things have been around for a very long time. We have dreamed about schools that are more like this than about lecturing and all of that. But this was never really like something that caught on much. It was like, oh, it's nice to have, but this is not serious education. Serious education is about really, the traditional stuff. But in the last 20 years, something changed, and a lot of countries started to realize that if they wanted in the knowledge economy, if they wanted to move from agricultural-based economies and industrial-based economies, they needed people that were more like in those kinds of environments, learning how to solve problems, being kind of critical thinkers, having being more resourceful, and all kinds of things, and not just like doing what has already been done for a long time. So countries started to realize, oh, this is really valuable. We should have more more of this in schools. And then the tide changed, and people started to say, where can we learn about this kind of education? And then they went back to people like Piaget, Seymour Papert, Vygotsky, and everything about how learning can happen differently. And so at the same time that there was this big interest in kind of project-based learning, experiential learning and all of that, because people realized that this was, what was going to move countries to the 21st century. There was another phenomenon that was kind of unrelated, which was the creation of very low-cost technologies for digital fabrication, for making things. So laser cutters, 3D printers, robotics that used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, all of a sudden came down in price almost 100 times. And a lot of professors and researchers took note of that and created a lot of different initiatives like the Fab Lab initiative and others that started to harness all these new technologies, low-cost technologies for, in the beginning, like college students to kind of prototype and make things. And soon people realized that this should be also in schools. So I was part of this with something that we call the Fab Learn initiative. That was the first academic program to bring digital fabrication, maker education to schools more than 13 years ago. And so we had like this low cost, or this kind of change in tide, this mindset of we need to do something different in schools, do more project-based learning. We had these low-cost technologies that started to appear in the early 2010s, and a lot of interest in doing this in schools. And finally, we had another initiative around 2005 that was the Make magazine and the Maker Fair that were created in the Silicon Valley. And those two things made the maker movement become a household name. So from a sort of a niche thing that some people knew about, people like in engineering schools, they knew about digital fabrication, rapid prototyping. When the Make magazine and the Maker Fair started, because it was in the Silicon Valley, and the Silicon Valley has this kind of advertisement power that is global, the idea of making things and maker education and the maker movement and people being makers and all of that, that became like a worldwide phenomenon in the mid 2000s to like beginning of the 2010s. And so, even though a lot of what we call now maker education, it already existed because we had like robotics in schools, we had a lot of things already, but with the Maker Fair and the Make magazine, this became like a worldwide phenomenon. And you might remember, this time it was really a big change in how people saw those kinds of activities. And from that time in early 2010s to now, a lot happened. So what have we achieved in this period? So with a lot of very important and fast changes happened. So we created a new type of space in schools. So schools have a sports area, some schools have a music room, an art room, and now there is a maker space, which is a new kind of space that didn't exist before. A new type of school activity. So if you go to many schools, people say, oh, now it's time for a maker activity. Like that didn't exist 10 years ago. A new type of teacher. So many schools now, they advertise, we want to hire a maker teacher. And that's a very special kind of teacher that does project-based learning, does a lot of these technology things. And a new goal for education. So now, I talk to a lot of policymakers and they say, I want my students to have a maker mindset, or I want my students to make things, to build things, to solve problems and all of that. So anyways, I'm just saying this because it was an amazing thing that happened in just 10 years. Normally those changes happen over several decades, but because I think mainly of teachers and how passionate they were about offering those opportunities for kids. This happened really fast and without any kind of central control. So it's not that there was a government telling teachers you have to do maker education or you have to start a maker space. It was something that was organic and bottom up, and that's for another that's a whole other talk, but it was a really unique kind of educational change, and we owe that to a lot of teachers that were part of this this movement. And I kind of fell in love with this idea of maker education because I realized that this was a great opportunity to implement the second model of education technology. That's not that kind of universal model of transmission, but a model in which instead of technology programming the child, as Seymour Papert would say, the child is in control of the technology, and technology is like paint in the hands of a painter, or it's raw material for kids to build things, express their ideas, investigate things they care about. And I think that's a really important use of education technology or technology in general, is to give it back to the kids so that they can use it to create and express ideas. And I think another thing that caught my attention in this movement was that schools have a particular way of working that, the projects come and go in schools. You might have had that experience. But when you have a space, it becomes an opportunity for building a culture. So around a space, you can build a culture. You can build something that stays. It's very hard to get rid of a space. It's easy to get rid of projects, initiatives, etc. But schools are very good at keeping spaces intact. So like if you have a type of space in schools like a library, it's been there, it's going to be there for 100 years. If you have a sports area, it's going to be there for decades. So I was excited about maker spaces because I said this could be the seed of a different kind of learning culture. It's different, to have robotics projects that come and go. It's different from having a space that's permanent. And around that space, you can build a new culture. So, it was a very exciting time, and I think it's still exciting because not because I love 3D printers or laser cutters. I mean, I do love them, but not because I think they would do anything by themselves. But it's because that space is a space that could be a seed of different experiences, different kind of learning cultures in schools. But anyways, as everything, some things worked in this kind of movement, some things didn't work. And today I'm going to talk about two things that are still not quite working very well. And one is how do we integrate maker spaces and maker education into the school curriculum, into the normal school day. And the second thing is about how we deal with culture, because we have kids coming from very different perspectives, and how we deal with that in maker spaces. So let's start with integration. So this is work that I'm doing with people in my team, especially Cástia Fernandes and Tatiana Roche-Greb. And so the problem with integration is that a lot of education innovations and technologies, they either become a club in school, so there is a robotics club for like 10 kids and out of 1,000, or they become very superficial. So when I go to a school and they show me the makerspace, I ask, how many kids come here out of your total student population, and how many hours per month they stay here? Because often, we don't want those places to be a space that you go once a month for 1 hour to do a keychain or to do a little LED blinking project and go home, and really you don't really learn much. So anyways, when I go to the schools and I ask those questions, unfortunately, many times people say, oh yeah, we have this space, we spend a fortune on all those machines, and kids come here, half an hour every month. Or they say, yeah, they come here and they do these little tiny projects for half an hour. Or, well, we have, 1,000 students, but only like 30 or 40 really come here because the others are not interested and all of that. So I'm always very suspicious of schools that show makerspaces without giving me those kinds of numbers, because if we have, we spend all this money and then a school has 1,000 students and only 30 go to a makerspace, maybe it's not even worth doing it if it's not going to be, democratically kind of distributed for the whole student population. So, the other thing is, there is a certain kind of critical mass of hours that you need to get, to learn anything. Like, you don't learn to play the piano if you go once a month for 1 hour in the music room, right? You have to go like with certain regularity. You have to, do it for a certain number of hours. Otherwise, it's almost like you never did it. And especially in countries like Brazil and India, where we have schools that don't have all the infrastructure that maybe schools in developed countries have, this is even more critical, because to invest in a makerspace is an even harder decision. I might need some water if someone... So we, a few years ago, were called by a secretary of education in Brazil, in the city of Sobral. So this is the map of Brazil. And the city of Sobral is in the northeast of Brazil. It's almost on the equator. It's very, very hot there. It's a little bit like here. It's sort of 35 degrees every day. It never changes. And by the way, Brazil is more or less the same size as India, but 5 times less people, or 6 times less people. So it's easier to kind of move around, but kind of less fun in a way. So that's where Sobral is. So when we started this project, we wanted to really make it integrated into the school day and make it democratic. So we wanted all the kids to have this kind of experience. So this is we started building labs. So this is one of the labs that we built. They were, I can talk more about that later. They were kind of low cost. We tried to use a lot of local technologies, etc. And we built labs in many schools. Now half of the schools in the city have those kinds of labs. But there was one problem. And so we built the labs, and then we also wrote new standards for the city. So we wrote this very kind of progressive science standards with lots of ideas about project-based learning, etc. And so we had the new science standards in the city. We had the FabLearn labs that we built. But for the first year, we weren't seeing many good results, because teachers were reporting to us they didn't have time to rewrite their lesson plans. They didn't have even time to go to the lab. They were afraid of using all this technology. They didn't have time to learn how to use everything. So we weren't really getting very good results. And then after talking to them and understanding how things were working in the city, we had this idea of creating a connection there. So we talked to the Secretary of Education and said, we need to hire a new kind of teacher for every school in the city, and we call this the pedagogical redesign teacher. So those teachers, we trained them and everything, and they were, of course, taking care of the lab and kind of managing the materials and et cetera. So they knew how to use the laser cutters and all that stuff. But the main thing they did was to sit with the teachers every week, with the science teacher, the math teacher, and say, give me a curricular unit that you have to teach next semester, and we will work on this and rewrite it to use the new technologies in the lab and to make it more project-based and to make it more student-centered. And then the teachers were, amazed, because they were afraid of using the technology. They were afraid of trying something new. They didn't have time to actually redesign. But then they realized, oh my God, there is someone who can help me do all of that. And if it goes wrong, it's their fault, not mine. So they were really happy. And we've been doing this work for many, many years there. And so we have this new kind of arrangement where every year a few curricular units in science and math are being rewritten and redesigned to be more project-based students. And you know, you might say, well, an extra teacher per school, that's kind of expensive, but you know, it's less expensive than buying a lot of technology that no one is going to use. So here are some examples of this kind of work. So this is a unit on vertebrate animals that, you know, normally you have a lot of lecturing and kind of categorization of animals, etc. So you build this kind of phylogenetic tree, etc. But so what the redesign was is that they still build the phylogenetic tree, and they did some classification, but the pedagogical redesign teacher and the science teacher created an animal building kit. So every kid would get this kit, and they had to create their own animal. So they created like the dino-make or the sea giraffe or the, you know, all these names in Portuguese that you won't understand, but like, so they created their own animals. And then for each kid was asked to, they had a worksheet where they had to justify all their design choices in terms of form and function, which was the main learning goal of this unit. So the point is like every animal has a form, you know, the horns, the legs, whatever, and that's you know, determined by evolution, by evolutionary pressures, by all kinds of environmental things. So then they had to, I mean, this is all in Portuguese, so you won't understand unless you speak it, but the point here is that they were saying, oh, the legs, they have this shape because this is sort of an animal that needs to swim in water and go in the land. The tail is pointy because of predators. The horns are also for protection. So they were talking about how they breathe, how they defend themselves, how they reproduce, what they eat, and that all was all related to the form of the animal. So it was not just like a kind of cool, creative, let's make a crazy animal kind of activity. It was very connected to the learning goals of this unit. And so it was creative, but also, you know, connected to the content they had to learn. This is another example of a nervous system unit where kids had to, you know, before they had to memorize all this kind of nervous systems, the components, what it does, etc. And here the teacher sat with the curriculum redesign teacher sat with the science teacher and said, let's do something cool with robotics, for example. So here kids, they have to create their own neuronal circuit. They have to create their own neuron. So what you see here is that this group was doing the kind of eyelid circuit, right? So the blue thing, is this, yeah. So the blue thing here is the eye, and they had an infrared sensor that detected objects coming close to the eye, and then there was this motor here with, you know, that later they attached a kind of artificial plastic eyelid thing, and so when, you know, and the sensor is here, and then whenever the sensor, like an object would come close to this eye, the motor would be activated and the eyelid would close, right? So they did this for like eyelid, for the knee, you know, this kind of automatic reaction of the knee when something hits it, and a lot of this kind of automatic circuits in the body using this low-cost robotics board, the GoGo board that Sahana mentioned before. So they, you know, did many other things. So this is also a worksheet where they had to say what's the equivalent to the infrared sensor in the human body, right? So it's like, oh, the eye has like depth perception. The eyelid is the motor, it's the muscle is the motor, whatever, so they could kind of map things out. And they did many other things. This is a unit on light and color that they use like different color LEDs and different kind of a dark room made of very low-cost cardboard. They did a project, a unit on soil and plants, understanding soil humidity and which plants grow there, also using you know, the GoGo board, but with a soil humidity sensor, and also like an energy generation and electrical circuits, etc. So anyways, a lot of this now is being taught in the city as their normal curriculum, right? It's not something that is a one-off. Now, instead of having all these lectures, that's what they have. They have all these kits. The teachers were part of designing those things, so they are very familiar with teaching them. And the makerspace is being used all the time because those materials need to be made. And one interesting thing that might also interest you here that I will talk about real quick is that, but in this place, they were telling us, we can't take 35 kids to the makerspace. Like, we have one machine, one 3D printer, one laser cutter. So the way they are using the makerspace is quite interesting. They're using it as a factory of educational kits. The teachers mostly use it as a factory of educational kits. So they bring the kids there, they sit, and then they give out the kits, and everybody can work on their kits, etc. But they realize, for us, in our reality, this kind of US model of a makerspace where we bring kids and they can laser cut their own stuff. This works in after school sometimes, but it doesn't work during school time. And it was a bit painful to hear that, but I realized that's a very interesting creative adaptation of a model to the reality of a country where classes are very large and you can't have every kid using the machines, etc. So that's one of the points that I wanted to make about integration, all kinds of different. It's possible to redesign units in this way and create this kind of permanent repository of interesting student-centered project-based while still achieving the learning goals that you have. So the second point that I'll make, and I'll kind of have to go a little faster now, and soon beg for more time from Sahana, but we'll see. And it's something called cultural making. So this is about how do you get into the makerspace. So we started doing this research called cultural making in Brazil initially, going to different communities and researching how people make things, how do they create objects, transform materials, etc. So the first place we went was the Samba School. It's I guess you've seen on TV. It's like this huge parade in February in Brazil, and we wanted to know how they make those huge floats and how the costumes and everything. So we spent like 2 years researching it. The Escola de Samba is like Samba School, and so we looked at like this enormous float. This is like 7-8 meters tall. And we thought, oh, this is probably like a sculptor goes there with, very carefully sculpting the thing. And then we realized that actually the way this gets done is very creative. So this guy, he creates a 3D model on a 3D a CAD software, a 3D modeling software. And then he glues, he tapes a transparency onto the screen of the computer and copies every layer of the 3D model, right? So he does one layer, then advances a little bit, copies the second layer, etc. And then he takes all these transparencies, he projects it on a wall of styrofoam, and then he traces again all the slices, and then he cuts with hot wire, and then he assembles so it's like a human 3D printer, right, that this guy invented. So he assembles it like this in layers, and then later they paint and everything. So we started to document all this kind of fascinating making techniques that people had, often even with digital technology, right? And then, maybe this is not like the traditional 3D printing curriculum that you'd see in a school, but we started to think, what if we bring more of this into schools? So bring this guy, for example, to teach 3D printing instead of, an engineer like most of us. I'm also an engineer, so I can openly criticize because we learn things in a very kind of, no, this is the way to do things, etc. But this guy invented something totally different, and maybe it would be even more interesting for the kids to learn this kind of 3D printing that he created. But we started to look at also other kinds of things. For example, playmaking, right? So this is another location we went, and there was a story of the mother of the clay. So we visited this kind of clay makers in Brazil. They make those clay objects, and they have this very interesting a kind of non-human entity that they call the mother of clay. And when they go collect the clay, the mother of clay has all these kind of rules. It's sort of a divinity or like a deity. And the mother of clay determines there is only one day in the year they can collect the clay, and you cannot be pregnant, you cannot be having your period, you cannot be sick, and only the women can do it. And there are all these kind of rules. And they reported that whenever, like, once there were some men that were helping and they were playing music and the clay was ruined for the whole year. And so they have all these rules, this kind of rituals to get the clay. Then they get all these bags of clay for the whole year. And then they make those clays and they use in their homes or they sell to tourists. But it's a very kind of regulated process by this kind of deity, this kind of non-human. And I will talk about this a little bit later, but in this community, making happens between people and this entity. So this entity is kind of participating in the making because she is determining how things get collected, how things can be used, and all of that. And I'll come back to that in a bit. Another location we went was where these women they make this kind of baked goods in these ovens that you see there, and you see the baked goods here. And these women, they build their own oven. So we actually follow them building one oven from scratch. So you can see here they are like starting the site, then they put this kind of structure, they measure things with like garden hoses, then do all this stuff. And this is the final. And there's a lot of science in doing these ovens because the clay actually changes color with temperature. So the way they know when it's, when the temperatures are good or bad, it's by looking at the color of the clay. And they have also this incredible thing, like there is this type of plant that burns at the same temperature that they have to bake the cookies or whatever. So they use this as a thermometer. So they put it there. If it burns, it's the right temperature, right? So anyways, they have, and you can see the color here because it's hot. It's almost white, right? Very different from like the red when it's cold. So these communities have a lot of scientific knowledge about clay and baking and temperature and heat transfer, but it's not the kind of standard scientific knowledge that you would get in a thermodynamics class. But again, like the idea is, why don't we have more of this in a makerspace or in science instruction? Because maybe a lot of kids will come from communities like this, and then they can see that, oh, my mother or my grandmother, she's also a scientist, because she is using instruments to measure temperature. She has all these procedures to create the oven, and etc. So, and a very interesting thing in this community is that they had this very kind of emergent way of working. So when they were working, there were no assigned roles. They would switch from kind of leading to being led. They would go from like putting the bricks to fetching materials. So it was a very kind of emergent, complex arrangement. Very different also from like more traditional engineering where everybody has a role, etc. Right? So, anyways, the point I'm trying to make here is that our work of these two communities and also the Samba School show that in the real world, and especially in places like Brazil or India that are very, very diverse, people are making things all the time, but they don't follow this kind of traditional engineering practices or arrangements where you have, for example, a team, everybody has a role, and you have to do your job, and you get specialized in one job. In this case, they all rotate roles, which might be actually a much better way to learn in a school if people are rotating roles than if people are specializing in just one thing. And also in the real world, people have this kind of interesting arrangements they make together with a non-human entity, and that helps them regulate the process. I mean, I can imagine that having that non-human entity that's telling them, you can only collect the clay once a year helps make this process sustainable, because then you don't get to over extract the clay. And also all those rules help build identity and build self-efficacy in this community, because they say this is our stuff. Other people cannot just come and collect our clay and take over our activity, and etc. So a lot of this making is always embedded in complex social and historical processes. And often, with our kind of engineering eyes, we might look at those things and say, oh, this is all nonsense. Like, let's do the real thing, which is go and solder some LEDs in the makerspace. And that's but that would be missing a lot of this complexity and these interesting things that are happening there. So let's say if we were to say, oh yeah, we'll do a kind of oven making activity in the makerspace, but we won't do any of this kind of mother of the clay, we won't do any of these other things, we would be kind of stripping down this activity from all its cultural richness and all its relevance to this community. And also, kids won't be having the whole experience that they could have. So I think one of the points that I want to make here is that the makerspace is this, doesn't have to be a space where we only do the kind of traditional engineering things, we only solve problems with microcontrollers and 3D printers and laser cutters. It can be a space where, by doing activities like this or going to communities and understanding how they make things, we also understand the culture of those communities. We also understand other ways of looking at the world, other ways of dealing with materials, dealing with the construction of things. And so it's not just a place for this kind of engineering work of building and making things, but it's also a place for discussion, for example, about the sustainability of making, right? So imagine you go to a makerspace and you can only use one piece of wood a year, just like they can only collect the clay once a year. It changes completely your perspective on sustainability, on how the wasteful use of materials and everything. So looking at all those communities, looking at all these kind of non-traditional ways of making things and how they are embedded and kind of deeply connected to culture, to different ways of thinking about the world, I think is a great thing to bring to makerspaces, so that we can make them spaces for social imagination, for cultural exchange, and for us to allow kids to understand other ways of being and looking at the world through engaging in maker activities that look more like that. So I want to end talking a little bit about what making is for and what we should think about when we design makerspace. And I realize I'm almost out of time. So we make things for survival, for like basic things like food and things for immediate utility. But we also make things for creativity and invention, for spirituality. Sometimes you make things that are not, they don't have that immediate kind of day-to-day use, but it's something that is for like, a religious purpose or a ritual. Sometimes it's just for aesthetic enjoyment. Sometimes it's, it's not something that you're going to use, but it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. Sometimes it's to to affirm the identity of a group, like you saw in the clay makers or the oven makers. That making activity was, of course they needed the clay pots and everything, but maybe it was more than the clay pots. They needed to be together. They needed to see, we are a group, we have an identity. It's almost like the clay pots were a pretext for them to be the clay makers. So they were more like a group that recognized itself through making than actually, maybe they didn't need all those pots every year. And also sometimes it's kind of political organization, in the sense that when you're a group, you're stronger, you can, organize and demand for better schools, better conditions, etc. And also for cultural transmission. Sometimes it's about learning from your elders. Sometimes it's about learning about your family. So we make things in the real world about, for all those reasons and probably many more. And we shouldn't limit what kids do in Makerspace to just like creativity and invention or solving problems, right? And this requires a lot of kind of creative design and flexibility to design things that can, allow for a lot of those different things. So, going back to my first slide to wrap up, we're talking about the kind of first kind of universal model of education technologies. And I think this second model, which is where you make things, you put technologies in the hands of kids, it's an area that needs still a lot of design, a lot of energy. And I want to call on all of you who are in this field to think about directing energies towards the second type, because I think if we want to live in a more democratic, in a more culturally diverse world, we need to have more opportunities in schools for kids to, by making things, understanding other cultures, understanding each other, and by creating things, developing the skills and the attitudes and the competencies that we want to see in the 21st century. And so I think I want to end saying that to me, makerspaces are more than the machines that are there and all that stuff. They are sort of an empty design canvas. So we have that space in schools, and now it's up to us to design what they will be. They don't have to be a place with like 20 3D printers. They can be a place where you do clay making, where you bring people from the community to teach the kids to do traditional crafts, then mix with other crafts. So they can be anything. And that's, I think, the most amazing thing about having that space is that now it's an empty canvas for us to design and to create the learning experiences that we want kids to have in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Paulo. So what we do is we have about 15 minutes for good discussion and Q&A. We have had some people post on the Padlet also, so we'll kind of alternate, take a few questions from the room and from the Padlet, which Arjun will do. So floor is open to all of you. Just raise your hand, we'll pass the mic around, and if you've already posted on Padlet, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask a question. Okay. Would you like to just say your name and which organization?
My name is Yajura Juni, and I come from EI, Educational Initiatives. Hi, Paulo. So, you talked a lot about makerspace and all. So, is there any common assessment framework when it comes to assessing the students for whatever skills they have developed throughout the period, throughout the semester or year in this makerspace? If we are to define any assessment frames for it, what can you talk more about it?
Yeah. So now there are some assessments. We created one assessment a few years ago that's published in, I think, 2016. I can send you the paper. It's called EFT, but I can explain more later. But it's so that's one kind of thing. Like there are some questionnaires that people have developed to look at changes that happen after you participate in those kind of maker activities. There is another kind of branch of this, which is called multimodal learning analytics, that I think some of you do here, which is using gesture trackers and facial, computer vision and facial expression detectors, and other kinds of this, advanced sensing technologies to look at patterns in making. So, for example, one of the projects we did, we looked at kids in a makerspace, and we realized, for example, that the kids who paused more, they had a better performance in the post-test. And the kids were always doing stuff, because we could detect automatically with those sensors that they were always moving and doing things. They performed less well in the post-test. And then we realized that it's really important to design in your activity cycles of making and reflection, right? So the pauses that we detected were reflection moments. And when you're never reflecting, you're just like doing stuff all the time, you don't learn as much, right? So that's one example of how this kind of multimodal data can inform design. And I think, there are also more now like concept inventories of making, and people are trying to look into, for example, debugging skills, right? How do you debug a circuit? How do you debug a mechanical construction, and trying to make that more systematic? And so I can later send you some of the papers that people have been developing. But it's a very challenging thing because of the open-endedness of what happens. Right?
Thank you. Other question. I also want to mention that we have a room right next door. So since this room filled up, we have about 20-25 people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if people in the overflow room have questions, please use Padlet. I know you can hear me even though I can't see you. And maybe switch to the tablet, Paulo, with the laptops. Is it okay for you to just connect the...
Yeah. Oh, you want to connect? Okay.
Hi. Yeah, hi, Paulo. This is Nagarjuna from PES Bangalore. So my question is on how you take the teachers through this process to create this cultural change. Is there a formal program which, in schools you do it and then they get some certification or something like that?
Yeah. So in that example that I showed, we created a program to train those pedagogical redesign teachers. So we work with them for a whole year. And so it's one per school. So it's not so many. So we can do more like in-depth training. And so in this program, they learn about the machines and all the technologies, but they also learn, we show them lots of examples of, project-based curricula, student-centered curricula, hands-on curricula. So, and they have to create, with our help, lots of these units as part of their training, right? So when they finish, they have created, a lot of this kind of units like the ones you saw here. And I think one of the interesting things there is that, as I said, it was amazing when we asked the other teachers, say, in the beginning of the project, you didn't want to participate, and you were very, and they had all kinds of things. They said, no, I have my classes, I've been teaching them for 20 years, I don't need any changes, I have here my notebook with all my notes. And then later they said, I have to confess, actually, I was afraid of failure. Like I was afraid of trying something new and then being a failure because, I'll be in front of the students trying to do something I don't really know very well. But they said, now that there is this other person here helping me, I feel like, as I said, I mean, jokingly, like, yeah, if it doesn't work, it's not my fault, right? It's the guys. And so that was one of the big revelations for me, is like how much of educational reform or new ideas don't get implemented because, the teachers are afraid, and they are right in a way, because, we don't want to go in front of people and do stuff we're insecure about, right? And I think, particularly in Brazil, I don't know if it's the case here, like a science teacher, a typical science teacher would have, 45 minutes of training every 2 weeks. There's no time for, imagine in 45 minutes every 2 weeks, you have to teach them how to use a laser cutter, a 3D printer, how to code, it's just not in that context, maybe in the US where there's more time, but in that context, we realized we needed this extra person to help them out. Like there was no way in 100 years we wouldn't train them in using new technology. So that was kind of the policy solution that we found. And then, as you asked, we designed a program to. So in a way, we have this extra teacher that is sort of a constant presence in the school, and it makes things work much better because the person is there. We know what's happening in the school. They're helping the teachers to do this work, and considering like the overall cost of this, I think it was one of the best decisions we made. Yeah, thanks for that question.
So you can take a look at a couple of the questions here. I can scroll down and I will pick any.
Yeah, so I think this is a great question, the first one. I think there are many reasons. One is that there is often a misalignment between the national policies of a country and the implementation of project-based learning. So, in many countries I go and people say, hey, we want you to do project-based learning. And then I say, how is the university admission exam? And I say, oh, it's the most traditional exam ever. So it's really hard to convince, policymakers that, or like even parents that, yeah, let's do this, but your kid is not going to university. It's not an easy sell. So I think that's one reason. And I think the important conclusion there is that we need also to work with policymakers in, maybe slowly, but surely changing those kind of national policies. So for example, the PISA organization from the OECD, they are now developing new tests. You probably know this, the PISA rankings, like they test math and language and stuff. And they rank the countries, and now they are developing tests for problem solving, tests for computer, like coding and computer science. So they are developing other tests, and they will also rank countries. I don't love ranking in particular, but they will have those rankings about like problem solving. So they will test like 9th graders all over the world and publish this ranking. So I think that kind of thing creates incentives for systems to change in this more kind of macro level, right? And maybe then they'll say, oh, there is a PISA test, so we need to have our university entrance examinations to have maybe a portion that's more problem solving, right? Or more like a portfolio of projects. And I think that would kind of make those kinds of changes more real, right? Because if you have this misalignment, it's really hard. The other question is that it's more expensive. I mean, there's no way around it. If you need more materials, the cheapest possible way to teach is to stay in front of a classroom and speak, right? But if you need materials, you need a space, you need a lab, whatever, it's more expensive. And often we need to convince the public and the governments that it's not wasting money, it's a good investment, right? And that's also a kind of political task that we need to do, just convince that good education is expensive, right? There's no way around it. If you want to do all that stuff, you need to spend more, but you get much more at the end, right? Yeah.
I'm Aditi. I'm from the Center for Creative Learning. I'm here at Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhinagar. So we do a lot of they were very similar to what you were talking about, where my colleague Prof is also here. We actually take our work to teachers in the ground. But then, because teachers on the ground are not trained, we actually work with them remotely. So we are kind of leading these making sessions remotely, while the teachers over there are more facilitators. So one of the problems that we encounter is there is a push from the government to run this program, and therefore the teachers will execute it. But we find that apart from the self-efficacy, that they don't believe that they are well trained to do it, they also don't believe in the program, and their beliefs associated with making about whether it's really going to change the lives of their students then becomes very important in how they go about actually executing this on the ground. So can you share some experience about how you actually did this, how you worked with the teachers in that regard? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, Fuat was my student, so great to see you here. so I think, like, when academics are doing like their nice research projects in the world, it's one kind of thing, right? You do work with a few teachers and it's nice to write papers, etc. But when you start implementing like in real systems, it's a whole different animal, right? So there is a lot of like political strategy that you have to, so you have to, in this case, we brought, for example, the Secretary of Education of the city for 1 week to the US to do a kind of training for him, right? For him to understand what this whole thing was about. So we took his cell phone out because those politicians are always like on the phone and whatever. So we cut his cell phone. And so he was there for a week and with his like immediate team. And so we explained like what this project will take, the kinds of political choices he'll have to make, the kind of investment, etc. And then, so we did that. And then every month I have a meeting with this person who is the same since, many years ago. And everything that kind of goes a little out of any kind of problems that we have, in this meeting I said, hey, the project is not going well, you have to call your district manager, whatever. And so and if not for that, we would never have done this project. Just for you to have an idea, like once the kind of lawyer of the city said, oh, this thing is illegal because the teachers, like, it's this kind of crazy, the teachers get a bonus for if they are in the classroom for a certain number of hours a week, they get a bonus in their salary. But this lawyer, not lawyer, it's like the council, the legal council, they said the makerspace is not a classroom. So if you're in the makerspace, you don't get a bonus. The hours don't count. And so the teacher was like, okay, we're not doing it anymore because we step on the makerspace and our bonus stopped counting. So it's like, I didn't learn that in grad school, this kind of stuff. And then I had to talk to him and say, okay, like talk to your counselor, like we need to find a way to, so there are all kinds of crazy things like that. But so that's one part, this kind of, management of, is not easy. The other part is often teachers and schools are overloaded with projects, right? We are all like, oh, my project is great, but there are 20 other people saying my project is great. And you really need to build like healthy relationships with teachers, with school principals. And that takes time sometimes, and also it takes a lot of openness and kind of honesty because sometimes it becomes a bit like extractive, that you go there, you do your stuff, and sometimes teachers are suspicious of that, right? So I think it's important to create those relationships. So for example, one of the things we often do is to invite the teachers to co-author papers at conferences. So in the ICLS conference, the last few years, we had these teachers from Sobral presenting posters as first authors. So we helped them to publish stuff. Some of them wanted to do masters and all of that. So, there's a lot of things you can do to show that they are kind of protagonists and you really, want to work with them as partners instead of, and I think, another thing is just to maybe show examples of things that can be different and how they can benefit them, right?
So the program chairs have kindly allowed 5 more minutes, and I think we have time for 2 quick questions. The gentleman over there had raised his hand, so let's go with that. Please keep it short. By the way, there's a tea session right after this, so the next session starts at 11, so you can continue with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Yes, I guess it's on. Yeah. Hello. Can I get that? Yeah. Hi. I'm Ashish. I teach sociology at BPS Women University. I really like this idea when you mentioned culture making, and I was wondering, should we rather refer to it as culture tapping? Because
Culture what?
culture tapping. I mean, trying to understand a culture and at the same time introducing certain new modalities, which perhaps this culture would not be epistemologically aware of, because you mentioned the epistemic gaps which may be there in understanding the technologies. And you rightly pointed out that we don't want to be invaders of space. And because we are trying to understand the community in their context, I was just wondering as to, how it will unfold, since in the previous question also we got to know that there are certain, other instrumentalities which enter the scene. And because there are, given the epistemological gaps, not being able to understand the context in which a technology operates. Now, if we say that this is culture making, so would it not be at some level uh, being kind of, we are the ones who are validating what actually is the outcome of an interaction? So how will we maintain sustainability and the community rights perspective that you were talking about? So that's the question.
Right. Well, it's a great question. I think uh, one um, one important point in what you're saying is that it's important to not to make this so that it's like we're valid, as you said, we're validating. Oh, this is making. Oh, great! Like I'll put you a label and I kind of approve your clay making as something we value. And I think not to do that would require changing kind of the goals of a space like a makerspace. So instead of saying, oh, this is for teaching STEM skills for the 21st century jobs, and then we'll pick and choose what from these communities, what we think fits that bill, right? I think it's more about, as I said, like the makerspace as this kind of empty canvas that we can say, okay, this is not, maybe it will also be about STEM learning, whatever, but it's a space for cultural exchange, and it's a space to understand how other people live. And in that sense, we invite people, or we invite those practices in, not to extract the STEM, the science pieces of it, but to understand holistically what those people are doing and the value in what they do in a way um, that respects their integrity, right? So as I said, like, I've seen things that people say, oh, we do this kind of culture relevant making in our makerspace, so we allow kids to play with clay and play with, but it's kind of, you cut off the clay making from everything that generated that practice, and I don't think that's a good way to go, right? So I think it requires a lot of like rich, interesting designs and ways to bring those communities without like a kind of harmful power dynamics that they feel we are validating them, but more like we're learning from them in this space that is a learning space for all kinds of things, even if it's like, so it's not a space where we'll say, oh, actually there is no mother of the clay, like this is just superstition, like this is just clay, and so not doing that, right? Say, okay, like understand that in this holistic making activity that you're doing, this has a role, it's an important thing, and it's an integral part of why this is meaningful to you. And for people to understand a little bit like, child anthropologists, that, oh, this is how society, it's, we're not here to judge them for whatever. So I think that's sort of like one, but I think that's a very important thing. It's easy to fall into the trap of, being extractive and say, oh, this looks like the science I recognize, so I allow you in, right? So I think that's an important thing.
Okay, thank you. And we're really happy to see that there's so much interest and so many questions. I'm afraid we really have to end this session, otherwise we all not be able to have tea and we have to keep running. So Professor Paulo Blikstein is here today, and I believe some, at least some other part of the conference. You can find it during lunch, during sessions. It will be just one moment. So,
Can email me.
yeah,
There are other
right.
questions.
Post your questions here. Any remaining question, we find a way to get it to him and maybe have him answer on this itself and then share it with everyone. Some such thing we will do. So in the next short time, we'll kind of try to get to your questions as much as possible. We have a small memento just to thank you and to remind you of India.
Oh, thank you.
The photo.
Huh?
We want the photo.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
The
you.
next, in the ports and nouns. City is in the capital. Thank you very much.